Well, happy Memorial Day weekend. You know, Memorial Day, it's like the unofficial start of the summer. The sun is out, the flags are waving, and everybody's debating who makes the best potato salad. This is a clue. I like Memorial Day. It's fun to be able to see who can overcook the most burgers. For many of us, Memorial Day weekend is like a relaxing, extended 3-day weekend. But underneath all the sunscreen and smoked meat, we're remembering something important. People who have stepped in. People who have faced danger. People who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. Which brings me to the biggest criticism I hear about God, and it's this: why doesn't God do that? Why doesn't God step in? Why doesn't God do something about the evil in our world? Well, next week we're going to begin a new series where we teach through the Old Testament book of Joshua. This week, 1 Samuel chapter 15. A Memorial Day type passage where he calls his people to confront evil. And heads up, this is not a pleasant passage. This is not a likable passage, so brace yourselves. The year is 1020 BC, so we're about 1,000 years before Jesus comes to earth. And a guy by the name of Saul was the king of Israel, and God commanded Saul to do something. Commanded him to do this. 1 Samuel 15, verses 2 and 3. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. That's horrible. Read this passage and think, man, that's awful. And the worst part about it, well, it's God. He's not passive, he's not neutral, he's not indifferent. He's the one who gave the command. See, God's not just allowing bad things to happen, he seems to be causing them. What do you do with that? What do you do with this passage in the Bible? Because 1 Samuel 15, this is a notorious passage in the Bible. It's a popular passage for people who are opposed to Christianity, who want to tear Christianity down. They'll take this passage in the Bible and say, look at that. How do you explain that? That's in the Bible. What do you do with that? What kind of God would command that? So I think we should probably answer that question as ourselves. What do we do with that? So here's what I'm going to have us do. I'm going to hold that thought. Okay, I'll get back to that towards the end of the message. Okay, going to face it head on. We'll get there. But I think in order to get there, first thing we need to do is unpack this passage and understand what God's doing, what he's saying in it. So let's keep going. Okay, what happened? God, he just gave this order. So how did Saul respond to God's command? Did he do it? Did he obey? Verse 4. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. So Saul, first thing, he gathers the army, he attacks the Amalekites. We say, well, so far, he is doing what God wants him to do. But then we read this, verse 8. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive. Now wait, did God say anything about keeping Agag alive? See, I don't read anything about take him alive in God's original orders. Do you? I mean, I read attack, and I read destroy, and I read do not spare. Well, Saul's disobedience, it actually gets worse. Verse 9. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle and fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely. So, just to be certain, let's go back to God's original order and see if we can find any loopholes in there. Verse 3, now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Anything unclear? Confusing? What part of totally destroy did Saul not understand? We can say a lot of things about this passage, but one thing we can't say that God was unclear. God was clear. Saul knew, but Saul, he deliberately chose not to obey. So why? Why Saul, knowing what God was calling him to do, why didn't Saul do that? Because don't you think that maybe Saul, maybe he had a good reason. Maybe he had an explanation for that. Well, when Samuel, and Samuel was the spiritual leader of the day, confronted Saul, here's the reason that Saul gave for not obeying God. Verse 15, Saul answered, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. He's saying, it wasn't me. It was all the other soldiers. They're the ones who did it. Yeah, right. And Samuel, he responds to Saul with this. Verse 16, he says, enough. Samuel said to Saul, let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night, which could just as well be translated, Saul, that's a bunch of baloney. Right? What Saul is doing here, we have a word for that. We call that rationalization. And if I was a rich kid, this would be a pretty good time to be paying attention right now. Rationalization, here's what that is. Rationalization is coming up with a credible reason to justify wrong behavior. Rationalization is self-deception by sound reasoning. Give you an example. Rationalization, it's kind of like this guy. Isn't he cute? And this little guy, he really, really, really wants that snack. So here's how he could rationalize it. He could rationalize it saying, well, if I eat it now, I won't be tempted by it later. And that's kind of true. It's rationalization. And rationalization, that's what Saul is doing here in 1 Samuel chapter 15. Saul uses rationalization to convince himself that he was doing the right thing by doing the wrong thing. So we see this and we should recognize, wow, how twisted is that? And then when we apply that to ourselves, we probably think, how easy is that? Because rationalizing things, I think we're pretty good at it. It starts with something usually quite innocent, and it twists our minds to start defining truths in convenient ways, in ways we really like. Well, I'm not gossiping. I'm just venting. I'm not lying. I'm just embellishing. Well, I'm not the one who started it. Well, after the week that I've had, I deserve this. Or what Saul used, everybody else is doing it. See what happens when we justify, when we rationalize, when we explain. Slowly, things that used to feel wrong start feeling fine. What used to be disobedience gets rebranded as justified. Most of us, we don't wake up in the morning planning to walk away from God. But we do get quite good at being able to explain why we did that. That's what's happening. 1 Samuel chapter 15, Saul, he had a reason. He had an explanation. He had justification for doing what he did. Now, interesting, Saul's justification, it wouldn't be the way I would justify what he did, and probably not the way you would justify what he did. Saul in here, his reason for disobedience was not a moral objection to this killing. That's probably where we would go. That's not where Saul goes. Saul, rather, he was quite fine with that. Reality was that was normal for warfare back in those days. Saul's issue, it wasn't, the morality of killing people. It was this. He just wanted to keep their loot. He wanted their stuff. He wanted their cows. He wanted their sheep. He wanted their lambs. He wanted that for him. See, rationalization, the most destructive lie, is the one you tell yourself. So here's one of the things that God is doing here in this passage in 1 Samuel chapter 15. He's encouraging us to do a little introspection and to ask that question of ourselves, to look at our own life. How about me? I see it in Saul. Is it in me? Is there anything that I'm rationalizing? Is there anything that I'm justifying? Is there anything that really isn't the way of the Lord, but I've got a reason for why I'm doing that anyway? Got anything like that? It's not just Saul. Verse 3, now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Totally destroy everything. What part of that is unclear? See, the issue here in 1 Samuel 15, it's not clarity. The issue is likability. It's clear. We might not like it, but it's clear. God was commanding Saul to do something that Saul didn't want to do. God was commanding Saul to do something that he didn't like. And so here's how about us? Do we know that same feeling? Because I think it starts with that word, command. Do you like that word? I don't. I prefer words like suggestions. I prefer words like opinions. I prefer words like, well, here's a helpful perspective. One of the things that is kind of troubling for people with the Bible is when you open it, you discover, well, God's really not putting out some nice, helpful suggestions. He gives commandments. Think, well, no thanks. Pass. I don't need anyone to tell me what to do or how to live my own life. I'm not interested in that. Here's the important part. God's commands, they aren't harsh demands trying to control us. He's a good father, loves us, and he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. God sees more than we see. And God, he knows more than we know. He gives us the freedom to obey or to disobey, but understand that when we ignore what he says, we're doing more than just brushing off his advice. We are resisting the leadership of God in our life. When it comes to God and the ways of God, it doesn't work like maybe we're used to in our day. It doesn't work like this. It doesn't work with everybody just sitting down at a table and dialoguing with God, trying to figure out what's best. Saying, God, here's my perspective. God, here's what I was thinking. And God's like, whoa, brilliant. That is so insightful. I never thought of that. No. God's saying, I'm sovereign. I'm immortal. I'm eternal. I'm the immortal, eternal, sovereign God. You're an accountant. Which one of us is more likely to be right? See, God, when it comes to God, he doesn't need help. God, he doesn't need outside counsel. God, he doesn't need to hire a consultant. God, he knows what he's doing. Do we believe that? God knows what he's doing. Do you believe that? Really? God knows what he's doing, even when you and I don't know what he's doing. Even when we don't see it, even when we don't like it, even when we don't agree with it, there is one who knows more. There is one who knows better than we do. God, he knows what he's doing. Let's take this passage, 1 Samuel 15, as an example of that. Verse 3, he says, now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Read that and think, that is awful. How could God allow that? See, when we read a passage like this one in the Bible, it's really easy for us to judge God. It's like, well, I can judge God. I can judge what he's saying and doing here, but we have to realize we are 3,000 years after the fact. And 3,000 years after the fact, well, we don't really even know what was going on back then. 3,000 years ago. There's a huge historical context gap. So let me try and fill a little bit of that in for you. See, the Amalekites, they weren't like this. They weren't the friendly Canadians. Everybody likes the Canadians. These guys were different. These guys were evil. When the Israelites were leaving slavery in Egypt, the Amalekites promised, we won't harm you. But they did. They waited for them to pass by, and then they picked off the stragglers, the weak, the vulnerable. They picked off the elderly and the children and the sick, even though they said they weren't going to. When the Amalekites conquered a nation, they were notorious for doing this. They would round up all the pregnant women and they would cut the fetuses out with a knife. That's the kind of thing they would do. And they were one of the leaders of the child sacrifice movement. Greek historian by the name of Diodorus Siculus puts it this way. He said, there was in their city a bronze image extending its hands, palms up and sloping toward the ground, so that each of the children, when placed thereon, rolled down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire. These children, they were very much conscious and alive when they were sacrificed. And he goes on and tells us the role of the priest was to beat the drums and play the tambourines really loud so that they would drown out the screams of agony. See, when we read a Bible passage like 1 Samuel 15, it can feel uncomfortable, but God knows what he's doing. It's Memorial Day weekend. Right? And Memorial Day, it's more than the day to, pull the grill out of retirement and hope it still works. Right? It's a day when we remember a difficult truth. Sometimes evil needs to be confronted. And confronting evil, it's never easy. It's never comfortable. It's never safe. Confronting evil comes with a cost. Today, the freedom that we get to enjoy exists because people have willingly stepped into danger even when it carried a personal cost for themselves. So you say, well, what about God? Why doesn't God do something? Why doesn't God step in? When there's evil, when there's suffering, when there's all these bad things happening in the world, what about God? See, when it comes to things like this and God, I think God is actually in what I would consider to be a lose-lose situation. Think this through a little bit. Okay, God's in a lose-lose situation. If God doesn't seem to do anything, and I put the word seem in there on purpose because sometimes he's doing things that we don't know. He's doing things behind the scenes that we don't understand. So I'll say seems. Sometimes when God, it seems like he's not doing anything, people will criticize him. Be like, well, where's God? Why isn't he doing anything? How can he let this happen? Okay, well, he's criticized when he doesn't do anything. How about the flip side of that? When God does do something, guess what? He gets criticized. That's 1 Samuel 15. What's happening here? People say, well, how can God do that? I don't like that. Somebody got hurt. God must be mean. Do you see the predicament? God, he's going to be criticized if he does something, and God, he's going to get criticized if he doesn't do something. 1 Samuel 15, verse 17. Samuel said to Saul, although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission, saying, go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out. See, here's what's happening in this passage. God is doing something. God is doing something. God is doing something about evil. Innocents were getting hurt. And God, he had been patient. He had been warning these people, the Amalekite people, for a long time. He was giving them an opportunity to repent. He was giving them an opportunity to turn things around. You know how long God had been warning the Amalekites? 400 years. 400 years. Our nation isn't even that old, 400 years. Rich kids, how long had he been warning them? How many years? 400, yeah, 400 years on that one. That's a long time, guys. 400 years God's been warning them. Now, 1 Samuel 15, God says, enough. Enough. That's enough. Amalekites, that's enough. I'm stepping in. I am going to do something. I am going to stop evil. This is my world. I made it. I created it. I ruled it. And you are messing it up. So for the sake of this world, I am removing you from it. And as the creator and maker, he has the right to do that. Well, this passage, it ends with Samuel, spiritual leader, doing what Saul did not, obeying. And then Samuel says these words to Saul. Verse 22, but Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices? Pause. Burnt offerings and sacrifices. I mean, that language, it sounds really kind of odd to us. Do you know the modern day equivalent of sacrifices and burnt offerings? The modern day equivalent would be this: a church service. Instead of singing songs and praying prayers, what they did is they offered sacrifices. So with that in mind, let's try this again. Verse 22. But Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? And I think that's a really good question. I think that's a rather convicting question. Is God more interested in us showing up at a church service once a week or obeying him every day? What do you think? Yeah, I'm really friendly at church, but I'm critical at home. Or I say that God is in control, but I'm stressed out all week living as if he's not. Or I'm singing at a worship service, but I'm tearing people down at the office or in the classroom. Is God more interested in us showing up at church, a church service once a week, or in obeying him every day? You know, Saul, he knew. He knew. God was clear. Saul knew that he was playing a little footloose and fancy free with God's commands, but he figured, well, since I'm showing up at church, since, I'm doing that, since I'm giving God a few sheep, I'm good. Is that the way it works? Well, God gives us an answer. Verse 22 and 23. But Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Saul lost his crown. Saul lost his kingdom. That's a rather steep price to pay for a herd of sheep. Verse 22, to obey is better than sacrifice. I think that is the heart of this passage. Hear it again. To obey is better than sacrifice. I know that this isn't a very likable passage in the Bible. I know that. I recognize that. I get that. But I'll also say this. It's not an easy message to hear, but it is in here. And when we open the Bible, we have this opportunity. We have this opportunity to hear from the living God. The Bible's not just, some collection of inspiring thoughts or helpful suggestions. It's God lovingly showing us the way he designed life to work. We have the freedom to obey him or not. But God, we see in 1 Samuel 15, God, he sees things that we can't see. He created this world. He understands how life works. He knows, what brings fulfillment. He knows what brings peace, and he knows what will eventually lead to hurt and brokenness. His commands aren't about taking joy away from us. They're about leading us toward what is good. Just look at Jesus. Jesus had a pretty good gig in heaven, don't you think? It was going well. He was being worshiped. He was at the top of the chart. He had angels and cherubim worshiping him, singing to him. But then when we had a problem, we needed help, what's he going to do? Oh, good luck with that. Well, no. Jesus said, okay, all right, I will leave heaven. I will come to earth for you. And he did. And he carried our sin. And he sacrificed his life on the cross. See, so when God calls us to obey, it's not because he's trying to make our life less. He's leading us toward a life that is more. 1 Samuel chapter 15. What does God want? What's God saying to us? 1 Samuel chapter 15. God in this passage, he's not in this passage, just hoping that Saul is going to impress him with sacrifices and services. He really just wants Saul to trust him. Trust him. To trust him enough to say, okay, God, that's not what I would do. That's not the way I would do that. But I will do that because I trust in you. When we trust that God knows what he's doing, it changes things. It changes obedience. Obedience stops feeling like a burden and it starts looking like wisdom. We don't obey God because we understand everything about God. We obey God because we fully trust him.